All right, we're back. Welcome back to Emotions and Emotional Intelligence. In this section, we're going to be talking about behaving emotionally, how we express emotions. So let's begin. This corresponds, by the way, to chapter 4 of Paul Ekman's book. All right. So I thought it'd be fun to start off by doing a side-by-side comparison of three main theories of emotions. And these are the basic emotions that include physiology and expressive behavior. So Izard, Ekman, and Plutchik are our three main theorists that we're going to be talking about. Ekman, of course, being the Ekman you're reading. And I thought I'd do a nice side-by-side. So they all agree that anger is an emotion that we experience. Disgust, fear, sadness, surprise. They all completely agree on those first five. This next one, they basically agree. Izard and Plutchik call it joy. Ekman calls it happiness. So they basically agree on this sixth emotion. I think one is, joy is probably more intense than happiness is, but, these are emotions. So it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what the subtle difference is between these words, but I'm going to call it basic agreement. And then I feel like Izard and Plutchik kind of agree on this one, interest and anticipation, but that I might be glossing too much. Those probably aren't the same. Izard goes on to list guilt, shame, and contempt as additional emotions. Plutchik only adds trust as an additional emotion. So we've got three models. Ekman has the fewest emotions at 6, Plutchik has 8, and Izard has 10. Of course, Ekman thinks the details that Plutchik and Izard offer are just parts of the basic emotions, or they're blends of the basic emotion. Izard and Plutchik think that it's worthwhile to pull these additional details out. So they've got a disagreement about how many emotions there should be, but they definitely agree, I'd say, on the first 6. Like everybody agrees with the 6 that Ekman lists, if you're willing to accept joy and happiness as the same thing. All right, now emotions are not categorical per se. They are based on dimensions, and there are two main dimensions of emotion. The first one is how much arousal the person feels, how much physiological arousal they experience. So an emotion can vary from high to low arousal. Some emotions make your heart race and some make you feel very calm. So arousal is one dimension, and then the other dimension is positive or negative, right? Some emotions are more negative. Some are ones that we'd like to avoid because of their negativity. Others are more positive. We might seek them out because of that. So what you end up with is 4 kind of classifications. I don't want to say categories, quadrants of emotions. So if you have emotions that are, higher arousal and basically positive, you might describe them in this way. Alert is very high arousal. Giddy is high arousal. Excited. Happy is probably a little lower arousal, but still positive. And happy is probably more positive than alert, right? So you have these kind of gradations. High arousal still, and now we're on the negative side. The highest arousal one is stressed out, and then next level would be afraid. Then there's nervous. Then disgust is on the negative side, but not necessarily that highly arousal. It's above neutral on arousal, but it's not that highly aroused. Negative emotions, kind of a neutral negative emotion that got us sad is closer to neutral as far as arousal. And then you've got bored, you've got tired out. These are all on the low arousal side of it, though. So it's like less energizing emotions, and on the negative side of that spectrum. And then you have the low arousal, but more positive. So calm would be low arousal, but it feels good. Relaxed. A little bit less low, right? A little bit more aroused than calm, but not much. Serene, content. So these are positive emotions that don't have a lot of physiological arousal associated with them. Content having more physiological arousal associated with it than calm has. So you get these kind of categories, right? You've got the positive and negative emotions and the high arousal and low arousal emotions. So let's look at some more recent stuff that came out, subsequent to the publication of Ekman's book. the Neuroimaging Studies of Haman, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce the last name, from 2012. So what they found is that there are some consistent neural activities associated with the basic emotions that you can sort of, with neuroimaging studies, see certain areas of activity or patterns of activity. But they have really, through these kinds of neuroimaging studies, thrown out the idea that there's a simple one-to-one mapping between, emotions and then specific brain regions where you go, well, oh, I see this. There's activity in this part of the brain, must be feeling happy. There's activity in that part of the brain, oh, must be sad. They've ruled that out. You can't make those kind of conclusions. Instead, we have to acknowledge that there's, a complex network-based representation of emotion going on in the brain. It's not single little, like a node that lights up. So this comes out of their report. And so I introduced you to our little quadrant of, high to low arousal and then positive and negative valence. This one is drawn like at a 90-degree angle from the one that I just showed you. So arousal now is not going up and down, it's going side to side. And then positivity and negativity is going up and down on this one. So they colorized the squares. Happiness are the yellow squares, sadness the blue, green square is fear, red is anger, and purple is disgust. And so the neutral thing is up there in the middle and it's gray and it's a chair. So it doesn't, it's low arousal, neutral on valence. It's neither positive nor negative. And then now we have actual stimuli. So beautiful sunset, positive valence, and, lower arousal. It's below baseline on arousal. Smiling baby, on the other hand, also positive, but it's on the higher side of arousal. Funeral, negative side of valence, and then a little bit on the lower arousal. It's kind of neutral. A moral violation is on the negative side of valence and then is on the higher side of arousal, but pretty close to neutral. Snake, higher arousal. Rotten food, higher arousal. So still negative valence. So with the stuff that they presented, they were able to, using neuroimaging studies, figure out where different kinds of stimuli would lie as far as these quadrants of valence and arousal. And there's evidence for these basic emotions that emerge as a result. So let's look at some more evidence that these basic emotions might be innate. I'm saying it a little incredulously because I guess there's still the possibility that learning could have occurred by the time the babies got to the ages depicted in these pictures. But again, with the universality of these facial expressions and the fact that they emerge very young, imply that these might be innate. So we've got, joy as, some of our researchers would call it. Ekman would call this happiness. And then the description, Ekman spends a lot of time in the book talking about exactly like what muscles would be contracted, right, to make the facial expression. I always like to see a picture. A picture's worth 1,000 words of description, isn't it? So here, I think you guys probably can take one glance at that baby and know that that baby is expressing happiness or joy. One thing I would like to point out, though, to be a little Ekman-like, is that this baby does not show contraction of the muscles around the eyes. So this baby isn't, I'm not sure I would call this joy that's being depicted. I might say happiness or something. The eyebrows are up, but you don't have the crinkling of the eyes. So it's probably not a full, like, Duchenne kind of smile. It's probably more of a happy smile, but not joy. I wouldn't call it joy. Anyway, anger. This baby seems what does a baby have to be angry about? But it's a perfect anger face, right? The brows are drawn together and downward. The eyes are fixated at whatever it is that baby is mad at. The mouth is just a thin line, right? And it's completely flat, so it makes sort of a square appearance. Like that is a perfect angry baby face. Here's a baby who's displaying interest, brows raised. The mouth is sort of a little, relaxed. Sometimes when people are interested, they'll make actually a pursed lips thing. This baby's got more of the slack mouth look. But it's pretty clear that that baby's interested in something. This baby's disgusted, does not like whatever they just put in its mouth. The nose is wrinkled, the upper lip is raised up. The tongue tends to push forward even when it's not a food that's actually in your mouth. Your tongue tends to push forward as if to reject food in your mouth. So it's kind of implies that maybe the disgust response might have originated as a way to get, bad food out of your mouth. Surprised baby, brows raised, eyes widened, mouth rounded into an oval shape. A sad baby, look at those eyebrows pulled up in the middle, right? I mean, that is a universal sad face. The mouth is pulled down in the outer corners into a frown. And then here we have a scared baby. I don't know what they showed this baby, but again, you got the eyebrows up and pulled up a little bit in the middle. The eyelids are open, and again, that autonomic nervous system you can tell is at work. Like when you're surprised or you're fearful, your eyes open wide as if to let more light in, so you'll be able to see better. You see in the fearful expression that the lips are pulled back, right? So there's a little grimace effect to the fear response. But the fact that some of these babies are really, really young, right? These are some pretty young babies expressing these emotions. So that this provides a little bit of evidence that these are probably innate. These are things that babies can show from the very beginning. All right, we're going to take a scale. So here's our response options. You can respond from 1 to 6. There is no neutral on this scale. If you pick something 1, 2, 3, it's going to be on the disagree side. If you pick something 4, 5, 6, it's going to be on the agree side. And on this scale, they went ahead and labeled what your options are, so you'll have a good idea what a 1 means versus what a 2 means. So I didn't mention this on the previous scale we did together, but it's always best to just go ahead and pick one of the numbers. Sometimes I have students who will respond like 3.5, and it's like, okay, that's uninterpretable. You need to just put a number. Pick one of the ones that you've been provided. So go ahead and grab a piece of paper and a pencil if you want to play along, and let's go ahead and take this scale. All right, number 1, I have a hard time labeling my feelings. I have a hard time labeling my feelings. Number 2, I'm usually tuned into my emotions. I'm usually tuned into my emotions. 3, I find myself thinking about my mood during the day. I find myself thinking about my mood during the day. 4, I am sensitive to changes in my mood. I am sensitive to changes in my mood. 5, I have trouble explaining my feelings. I have trouble explaining my feelings. 6, on my way home from work or school, I find myself evaluating my mood. On my way home from work or school, I find myself evaluating my mood. 7, right now, I know what kind of mood I am in. Right now, I know what kind of mood I am in. 8, I often evaluate my mood. I often evaluate my mood. 9, I am never really sure what I'm feeling. I am never really sure what I'm feeling. And then 10, I don't pay much attention to my moods. I don't pay much attention to my moods. All right, if you have to go back, pause me. Otherwise, let's charge ahead. All right, so what you just completed is called the Mood Awareness Scale. And the way that we're going to score it is you're going to first off go through those 10 items and only focusing on items 1, 5, 9, and 10. You're going to reverse the number that you originally wrote. So if you originally wrote 1 for item 1, switch it to a 6. If you first wrote a 2, you switch it to a 5, and so on. So a 3 becomes a 4 becomes a 3, a 5 becomes a 2, a 6 becomes a 1. All right, so you can pause me, and you're going to do this for all 4 of these items. Items 1, 5, 9, and 10. You're going to actually reverse the score that you gave. All right, hopefully you're back and you reversed your scoring for those 4 items. So now you have new numbers next to those items, and those are the numbers that you're going to use going forward. So you have switched your response. And it makes a lot of sense. You might have noticed that some of those items were phrased in such a way that if you are going to be consistent, you would have to give that a different rating. And so this is to correct that. All right, so what this scale measures is really 2 parts. Mood monitoring, which is comprised of items 3, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So those 5 items, items 3, 4, 6, 8, and 10. And you're going to go ahead and sum up the ratings that you gave for these 5 items. So for 10, I think is the only one that you had to switch, make sure you're using that new number that you gave, right? Don't use your original number, use the one that you just switched. And you're going to sum all 5 of those scores up and get one big score. Higher scores on this scale are going to reflect a greater tendency to scrutinize and focus on your moods. So what is a higher score? Well, we don't have averages that were provided by this scale developer, so I'm not exactly sure what is considered high. So, the scale, your score can run from 5 to 30. So if you're, closer to 30 than you are to 5, I would call myself a higher scorer. If I'm closer to the 5 end, I'd call myself a low scorer. Most people are probably somewhere in the middle, right? So most people are somewhere around 15 to 20. And that would be probably considered just sort of average. So it's hard to tell. But people who are higher in mood monitoring tend to show greater self-consciousness in general, tend to score higher on the neuroticism scale of the Big 5 inventory. So that means that they're more prone to worry and stuff like that. They tend to show lower self-esteem and they tend to experience greater negative affect. So they're more likely to have negative moods than people who are lower in mood monitoring. The other part of the scale is mood labeling, and that's going to be summed up from the 5 items that you haven't used yet. So that's going to be items 1, 2, 5, 7, and 9. And don't forget, for items 1, 5, and 9, you're using those switched numbers that you used when you reversed the scores. So sum up those 5 items to get the score on this scale. Again, your scale score can run from 5 to 30. And higher scores are going to reflect a greater ability to identify and categorize one's moods. People who are high in mood labeling tend to be less socially anxious, less neurotic, more extroverted, more non-verbally expressive, and experience greater positive affect. So the more you monitor your moods, the more likely you are to have a lot of this sort of things that go along with self-consciousness. The more you are able to label your moods, the more you tend to have characteristics that are associated with, greater extroversion and less neuroticism. So what are some of the implications of mood awareness? Well, Swinkles and Giuliano, who are the ones who developed the scale that you took, acknowledge that there really is no universally accepted distinction between mood and then, affect or emotion or feeling or whatever word you want to use for not mood. Ekman does a pretty good job of arguing that that the distinction should be time-based. Like emotions are very fleeting, whereas moods are, going to last for minutes, hours, days, perhaps, right? So he does sort of a time-based distinction between mood and then emotion, but there's really no universally accepted distinction. And so they're acknowledging that they're using the word mood, and some people might use this to indicate emotions. Most researchers do agree that moods are affective states and that they're nonspecific, persuasive, and capable of widely influencing cognition and behavior. So even though we can't really figure out a way to universally agree on the distinction between mood and emotion, we do know that moods have big impacts, for sure. We know that. So Swinkles and Giuliano argue that mood awareness and this, this tendency towards, mood monitoring and mood labeling can have big impacts on shaping your expression of your emotions and your management of your emotions and other kinds of things. Whether we're actually measuring mood or measuring emotion, we're not really clear. I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and we will come back in the next segment. We'll talk about meta-emotion. See you then.